r/ask Reddit. Who was crazy until they were right all along? Hemingway. Before he took his life he became extremely paranoid the FBI was following him. His wife and people around him just thought he was mentally ill and grew deeply concerned. Hemingway went as far as getting electrotherapy at a psychiatric hospital to try and help with the perceived delusions. Turns out the FBI had been following and bugging him for years according to declassified files. In comparison, there was a sci-fi writer Philip K. Dong who was convinced the FBI was monitoring him, so he kept sending demand letters that they release his file. His daughter was interviewed years after he passed. Extras on Scanner Darkly DVD if I recall correctly. I heard you've actually seen your father's FBI file and it is quite large. Yes, it's rather large. But the only thing in there are copies of his demand letters. You telling me I can just send spam to the FBI and they will keep it? That dude who suggested that it might be a good idea to wash your hands before performing surgery. A gentleman never washes his hands. We here at Harvard wash our hands after we pee. Well, so we at Yale don't pee on our hands. In the days of landlines, my phone was tapped. I could hear a strange hollow sound and I knew someone was listening. I had had a bad accident and was home for almost a year and involved in a lawsuit. I told my attorney about it. He told me the insurance company wouldn't bother. I mentioned it to my roommate. She told me I was crazy. I began to notice a van parked on my street. It was there for several days. I thought I was under surveillance. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. A person came to my door asking questions about the neighborhood. They claimed to be from a real estate company. They didn't go to other houses. I thought I was being watched. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. Several weeks later, my roommate's boyfriend was arrested for stealing physical and intellectual property from IBM. It was the beginning of the tech era and he stole millions in hardware and software and ideas. We were being watched to see if we were involved. The phone was tapped. We were under surveillance. We were taped. I wasn't crazy after all. Quite creepy, but a relief that you were correct. I don't mean to make light of your experience, but I can't help but imagine the people surveilling your house listening to you tell people they were listening to Yowie. Hope they weren't dongs about it. Ludwig Boltzmann, his equations and formulas explained the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. If experiments didn't show that they work, the derivations in stat mech would seem like utter bullshit. At the graduate level, it was less intuitive to me than quantum. I can't really see why it was hard to accept and possibly drove its creators mad. Ludwig Boltzmann, who spent much of his life studying statistical mechanics, died in 1906 by his own hand. Paul Ehrenfest, carrying on the work, died similarly in 1933. Now it is our turn to study statistical mechanics. David L. Goodstein, States of Matter. For a very long time the medical community thought that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. A doctor in Australia called Barry Marshall claimed they were wrong in that they were caused by an excess of certain bacteria, and the cure was simple antibiotics. The medical community ridiculed him and nearly ended his career. He eventually decided the only way to prove he was right was to infect himself, develop the ulcers and cure himself. In curing himself he was proved right and won the Nobel Prize for his efforts. And now stomach ulcers are very easily treatable. They previously affected 1 in 10 people. Full story Herreps. www. Discover Magazine. Health. The doctor who drank infectious broth gave himself an ulcer and solved a medical mystery. What's sad about these stories is that somebody coming up with a theory like that seems to be exactly the sort of thing which should excite medical professionals, as it not only challenges their views but also proposes a more effective solution. It's easy for me to be wise in hindsight, but it isn't as if he was advising people to rub a rabbit's ears and the good vibes would make the ulcers go away. That's true, and you are not even a little bit wrong. A lot of suffering happened, and a lot of care was withheld because of it. Doctors and others should be excited by new ideas, but I often think this story and a few like it are the exceptions that prove the rule. Science, both the method and the people, does its best, but it's human nature to resist new ideas. This happened in my lifetime. The resistance wasn't simply due to stubbornness, though. There was well-studied, hard-won dogma it refuted. One reason we constantly swallow saliva phlegm is that stomach acid and enzymes together just obliterate most pathogens, and the mucosal lining gives no opportunity to adhere to. So when Marshall discovered H. pylori in ulcers, it meant that not only was the theory on the pathogenesis of ulcers wrong, but that some aspects of stomach physiology were wrong, and that an exception to a major tenet of microbiology pathology had been found, and that he was directly contradicting the experts. The Dingo ate my baby lady got made fun of constantly, most notably in Seinfeld, and I believe went to jail because nobody believed her. Turns out a dingo ate her baby. She is still made fun of. This one was beyond ducked up. Your child is taken from you and killed by wild animals. Then you're jailed for murdering your own child and ridiculed the world over for your lame story as to what actually happened. Then, yep, being right the whole time. Not even being right, telling the truth the whole time. The ex-husband of my ex-girlfriend, turns out he wasn't the crazy one after all. He kept trying to tell me, and if I would have listened from the beginning I could have saved 4 years of my life. I'm so sorry, man. There are always two sides of every story, and unfortunately, sometimes we meet the liars first. Good riddance, and I hope the new space in your life is filled by someone much more deserving of your love and affection. Sometimes we meet the liars first. I don't know if you are quoting anyone, but I am stealing that very well written line. Sinead O'Connor. Younger redditors might not know who she is, but she was a singer/songwriter from Ireland who was a staple in the alternative music scene during the late 80s and early to mid 90s, who had some crossover hits. Anyway, at the height of her popularity she was the musical guest on Saturday Night Live after cancelling an earlier scheduled spot in protest against the guest host, which was some dumbass stand-up comic from the 80s called Andrew Dice Clay. As Scott Thompson described him, it's as if someone took your grandmother, the one who can't speak English, and taught her to swear phonetically, gave her a special on HBO and made her a star. During her performance she sang an a cappella version of Bob Marley's War, changing the lyrics to make it about child sexual abuse instead of racism. At the end of the performance she shouted something like "Fight the real enemy" and ripped up a picture of the Pope. In the following weeks people lost their shit, and on the next episode of Saturday Night Live they had at least 3 sketches that tore her apart. A few years later the Catholic sex abuse scandal broke internationally. I remember this happening, though I was pretty young. My father didn't like her music much, but he was like, good for her, duck those people. He had no love for organized religions, nor child abuse. I was in my late teens when this happened, and I remember watching all the episodes I mentioned. The one with Andrew Dice Clay was forgettable. The one she was on, I only remember her ripping up the picture and not really understanding the context, and the next week where the cast ripped her to shreds I totally remember. It wasn't until I was in college when I read an article about that show in the context of the abuse scandal. Courtney Love was warning everyone about Harvey Weinstein back in the mid-90s, but everyone just wrote her off. If you're a woman in this industry and Weinstein invites you to one of his parties, don't go. If Courtney Love, of all people, tells you not to go to a party, you should really not go to that party. It's like you're about to do some drug and Keith Richards says wow there man. I seriously recommend you don't do that. J. Holland Bretts. He was a geologist that in the 1920s came up with a theory about why the dry falls and surrounding scablands of eastern Washington state were so sharp and abrupt, instead of smooth as should be, with the general understanding of erosion, especially since the falls have no real river to speak of to create erosion. His theory was that a giant flood, created by an even more massive lake, ripped through the region millions of years ago, reshaping the landscape in a matter of days. He was laughed at and discredited in the geology community for almost 50 years, until someone discovered evidence in the 1950s of an ancient and massive lake that started just north of Montana that stretched all the way to southern Utah. The lake was believed to have been created by glacial dams, ice walls, during the last ice age. It would fill up over thousands of years and then hit a point where a glacial dam broke and the lake water would fire out the break like a water cannon, drain the lake, and reshape an entire region over several days as the water flowed toward the ocean. This happened several times, since the flood that carved the dry falls likely started from the Lake Missoula area in modern-day Montana. It was named the Great Missoula Flood. Bretz was given an award in 1979 for his contribution to geology when he was 96 years old. He joked, "All my enemies are dead, so I have no one to gloat over." Edit. Fixed name edit 2. Oh my goodness everyone. Thanks for all the upvotes and awards. I had no idea this would turn into such a popular post. The gloat. I'm glad he lived long enough to see his theories vindicated. I remember reading about the floods in college and it's still one of my favorite things to idly mull over. Like, can you imagine if we had video of something like that? Harry Markopoulou spent 10 years trying to convince everyone, investors, journalists, regulatory agencies, etc., that Bernie Madoff was a fraud. Based on forensic accounting, Madoff was one of the most respected names on Wall Street, and despite the overwhelming evidence, no one was willing to entertain the thought he might be running a Ponzi scheme. Harry's book, No One Would Listen, is a pretty great account of financial detective work and just the abject frustration of being absolutely certain you're right but no one believes you. Edit. If you want to see Congressman Ackerman absolutely destroy the SEC right after Markopoulos' testimony, here you go. If it ever comes out that we're in a simulation, this guy being named Madoff will be the Easter egg I point to when I convince people that the devs used interns from time to time. Honestly, this is why the GameStop story is so satisfying right now. For years, financial giants have lied to us about what's plainly visible to people who bothered to look, and somehow, they got away with it. They didn't manipulate the market near as much as they manipulated people. Michael Burry, the first guy to predict the 2008 housing market crash. He was a hedge fund manager for Scion Capital at the time and basically bet his entire fund's liquidity, all the money the fund had, that there would be a crash. No one believed him except a few other people who also bet against the market. Several of his clients sued him for tying their money up in what they considered to be a foolish bet, all to have him be right in the end. He made his fund something like $1.3 billion and the value increased about 489%. The movie The Big Short is about him and a few other people who were wise enough to bet against the market at the time. I've watched the movie like 5 times in order to try to understand exactly what happened but still don't fully get it. I recommend it to anyone who's interested. Fun fact, Michael Burry was also ahead of the curve in the recent GameStop surge. I think he had something like 1.2 million shares of GameStop months before the price shot up. Might need to fact check myself. Edit. Spell check. After watching The Big Short, I looked up how it all worked and what happened, explaining it in the simplest terms, in the simplest way, trying not to screw up some of the details. This is how it worked. When you are given a loan, that loan is sold over and over again within the market. The loan is graded based on the likelihood of you fully paying the loan. Higher graded loans are worth more. The lowest graded are almost unsellable, or were, until they started putting them into larger package deals that included some extra, higher graded loans that were not sold yet. This created a demand, and the market was flooded with the lowest graded loan. At the fear of losing business, low grade loans started being given higher grades, and these shitty loans, now being presented as higher valued stuff, started being cycled through the market until they made it into the highest grading tier. This is what Michael Burry figured out. He checked loan by loan, seeing how shit the market actually was, and bet against it. Read the book. Lewis does a good job of explaining the bizarre, convoluted details of mortgage-backed securities. The movie makers apparently decided a real explanation would bore people and glossed over the details. The doctor who found COVID in China and was silenced and died in prison from COVID. The doctor who found COVID in China and was silenced and died in prison from COVID. Time. com/5,779,678 Wenlian coronavirus China doctor death. Text equals and %20 eternal %20 hero. %20 whistleblower %20 doctor %20 who %20 sounded %20 alarm %20 on %20 coronavirus %20 dies %20 and %20 China. Li %20 Wenlian. And text equals at %20 the %20 eng %20 of Wuhan %20 sounded %20 a %20 stuck %20 warning. As a note from that article, while he was sidelined, ridiculed, and marginalized by the authorities for attempting to spread the news, he was not imprisoned at the time of contracting COVID and dying. When the Civil War broke out, everyone on both sides thought it would be a quick victory. However, Sherman kept saying it would be a bloodbath that would drag on for years. His superiors decided he was insane and sent him out west to fight Indians, Native Americans, just to get rid of him. After it all came true and they needed some better generals, they said maybe we should bring back that Sherman guy. Yes, public opinion is rarely kind towards realists, pessimists during wars. During the American Revolutionary War, the British also felt the same towards Cassandras like General Gage and later Clinton. One was sacked, the other's army denuded in favor of Cornwallis, rather than accept a war of attrition. The British government preferred foolhardy yet aggressive generals like Burgoyne and Cornwallis, and reaped the consequences. Before World War II, Japanese ultranationalists wanted to assassinate Admiral Yamamoto, the successful planner of Pearl Harbor, because he kept saying inconvenient truths like in 6 months the Americans will overwhelm us. Since America can easily outproduce Japan's manufacturing capacities and rebuild massive fleets. The fan that predicted the show's How I Met Your Mother message and was shamed, only to be completely right in the end. What message? https://np reddit.com/fan theories comment/159 tk9 /how I met your mother a study in violence post c7kzq8h. Courtney Love and her quip about Weinstein. It's still wild to me that people will villainize someone while knowing damn well they are speaking the truth. It's like kids that join in making fun of another kid, even if they are friends with that kid or don't really like bullying. Most humans have an insane need to fit it. Hollywood is no different. When I was in Boy Scout camp we had this counselor named Don. He was kind of odd. He knew everything about trees and only really talked about trees. We had just gotten back from a hike that Don was on with us and we were just sitting around talking and he suddenly goes, "You know, they're gonna let girls into Boy Scouts soon." We were all like, "Yeah, okay Don." But sure enough, less than 3 years later, they did it. That's good. I was expecting Don to be a pedophile. Thankfully not. He's just a nice dude that likes trees. My wife who never liked my mom's husband. He apparently made a pass at her before we were married and I just wrote it off as Bob being Bob because it was honestly semi-innocent and at the time he and my mom were newlyweds. But over the years we started finding out he was hitting my mother. He fondled my sister. He was constantly cheating on my mom. He got caught trying to take an upskirt picture of my friend's underage sister. And he punched my mom in the head outside in the ice, causing her to hit her head on the pavement, fracturing her skull and causing an almost fatal brain hemorrhage. She needed 2 brain surgeries and now deals with balance issues and almost complete loss of taste and smell and hearing in one ear. He has never faced any consequences for anything because for reasons I can't quite understand local law enforcement in their podunk town takes his side every time she calls the cops on him. One time they even took her to jail because his drunk ass fell in the walk-in pantry while they were having an argument and he called the cops and said she beat him up. He's literally twice her size. Edit. Some questions I've had to answer a few times. He has moved out and they are getting a divorce. I haven't kicked his ass because I live 1,000 miles away. I don't know where he lives and I am the sole breadwinner for my wife and 2 daughters. If I go to jail they become homeless. My mom doesn't want him in jail yet because he pays the bills and if he stops working she loses her much needed health insurance and her home. The divorce trial is just around the corner and my sister and my friend's sister have agreed to testify against him. So we're gonna see how that goes. The next time a woman of your acquaintance expresses discomfort about a man you know, maybe believe her instead of dismissing it as person X just being person X. If old Handsy Jimmy is feeling up every woman around him, sure, that's old Handsy Jimmy being old Handsy Jimmy. It's also gross harassment that's actively against the law. Listen to women and believe them, not hard. This is terrible. Corey Feldman. Dude went on national TV to tell everyone that there was a network of sexual abusers in Hollywood, and that he himself had been abused, and people laughed at him and shunned him. And then it came out that pretty much everything he was saying was true. Barbara Walters essentially scolded him for doing it. But to me, those reactions are sort of the equivalent of those who've just completed paying massive student loans don't want the next generation to have benefits of free or reduced price schooling. With how old Barbara is, she must have gone through a shitload of sexual harassment in her early days. Sinead O'Connor. People got big mad about her ripping up that picture of the poop, but she was right. Along this same vein, Courtney Love. We all thought it was the drugs talking when she spouted off about Harvey Weinstein, but that also turned out to be very true. That definitely killed her career and she should ducking sue CAA. That one journalist Gary Webb that uncovered the truth that the CIA aided and abetted Nicaraguan Contra rebels in funneling cocaine into inner city communities. And then he was blackballed and later killed himself. There is actually a book about Gary Webb, his investigation, and the aftermath called Kill the Messenger by Nick Shue. Edit. Webb's book is titled Dark Alliance. For anyone who wants to read it. Edit 2. Y'all are right. He killed himself, not killed himself. The official line is suicide. But, yeah, we all know what's up. The Radium Girls. When Radium had just come to the US and was being marketed on dials for Warren watches, girls used their lips to fix the paintbrushes to make their numbers and dials perfect. Eventually they started suffering horrible, painful experiences due to the radium. These girls fought for years to figure out A. what was wrong with them, B. who was responsible, and C. how they were going to pay their bills, support their families. It's a horrible injustice. These girls needed support and validation that they weren't crazy, that it was radium. And it took far too long and too many deaths for it to happen. Worst part is, the company knew it was bad for the girls and continued to encourage them to put brushes in their mouths. Oh no, it didn't just stop there. The company tarnished these sick women's reputations and said all their problems were caused by syphilis. They basically responded to cancer sufferers by calling them horses. Me. About my, now disowned, cousin. He kept stealing things from me which my family felt was no big deal, but it escalated. It went from stealing candy, to my things, to cash. And after that I asked them how much longer they would support him and call me selfish for not sharing. The line was finally crossed when he stole our grandmother's credit cards and her car. She finally wrote him off. This was after he had stolen all of her jewelry, including the last present, anniversary ring, my grandfather was ever to give her. Oh, but he tried to say that our family kicked him out because he is gay. No, none of us cared about that. It was because he is a thief. His friends have bailed him out of jail and then dropped him when he steals from them. But he claims the world is just unfair to him. Now he tells his pity story and milks the my family disowned me because I'm gay to everyone he begs from. I learned this when he tried to do it to one of my friends. He sounds exactly like my heroin addict cousin, minus the gay part. I swear he's stolen from everyone he knows. But he tells people that no one will help him, everyone abandoned him, yada yada. Many years ago he robbed our grandparents' house and stole jewelry, guns, anything of value. He went to prison. While he was there my mom secretly sent him money. When he got out she let him come stay with us. My parents almost divorced over it because my dad could see that he was still an addict and was just using her, and didn't want him around the house or around me, a 6-ish-year-old girl at the time. My cousin moved out, kept doing drugs. My mom kept secretly sending him money. He was in and out of trouble for years. Then he came by our house and was blatantly casing the place, asking about our TV, my computer, my mom's jewelry. She finally saw him for what he really is when he tried to bust through my bedroom window a week later, thinking no one was home, while I was inside. We haven't seen him in years now. It's nice to try to see the best in a person, but sometimes you gotta face the sad reality. Martha Mitchell. She was the wife of Nixon's AG, John Mitchell. She was outspoken in the extreme and was one of the first to talk openly about what really happened Watergate. Since she was also known to love her martinis, she was widely written off as a drunk, crazy woman. Behind the scenes, a White House doctor began heavily sedating her and her husband locked her away from the press. No one believed her until Nixon resigned and the story came out. To this day, most people only remember her as the loudmouth, Martha Mitchell. In 1912, the meteorologist Alfred Wegener described what he called continental drift, an idea that culminated 50 years later in the modern theory of plate tectonics. 40. Wegener expanded his theory in his 1915 book The Origin of Continents and Oceans. 41. Starting from the idea, also expressed by his forerunners, that the present continents once formed a single landmass, later called Pangaea, Wegener suggested that these separated and drifted apart, likening them to icebergs of low-density granite floating on a sea of denser basalt. 42. Supporting evidence for the idea came from the dovetailing outlines of South America's east coast and Africa's west coast, and from the matching of the rock formations along these edges. Confirmation of their previous contiguous nature also came from the fossil plants Glossopteris and Gangamopteris, and the therapsid or mammal-like reptile Lystrosaurus, all widely distributed over South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia. The evidence for such an erstwhile joining of these continents was patent to field geologists working in the southern hemisphere. The South African Alex Dutoit put together a mass of such information in his 1937 publication Our Wandering Continents, and went further than Wegener in recognizing the strong links between the Gondwana fragments. Wegener's work was initially not widely accepted, in part due to a lack of detailed evidence. The Earth might have a solid crust and mantle and a liquid core, but there seemed to be no way that portions of the crust could move around. Distinguished scientists, such as Harold Jeffreys and Charles Scotchard, were outspoken critics of continental drift. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.